Thank you, Roberto. So good evening, everyone. My name is Eloisa Quesada, and on behalf of the organizing committee of the National Conference for Teachers of English in Costa Rica, I want to welcome you to our final interactive webinar of day 2 in the conference. Robert Boyle was born and raised in London, England, and has worked in the field of language teaching in Mexico since 2007. He has held many positions, including working as the director at Hammond Hall, the director for Berlitz, Mexico in Guadalajara, and the head of the language department at Universidad del Valle in Sopopan. Robert was one of the first teachers to work with Laureate Languages Online program, and during his years with them, he developed material, piloted different programs, and created training courses for teachers. Recently, he has been acting as consultant, dedicating his time to COP engagement, material creation, course improvement, and quality assurance. Robert is also the co-founder and director at Erudite Languages and Kiki's Adventures, an interactive storybook-based platform for children to learn English. Here to speak to us with his presentation, Not Another Flipped Online Lesson, please welcome Robert Boyle.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the great introduction. It's so good to see so many people here. So let me get started. Guys, yeah, ever since the pandemic started and we've been sort of forced to work from home, we've all been hearing about this flipped methodology. And this is what I'd like to just take this afternoon to go into a little bit deeper about what flip methodology is and not another flip lesson. So guys, let's start off with a quick activity. Okay, we're going to play a game called Outsmart the Expert. So we're going to put you in groups, and one of the people in the groups is going to be an expert. You can be an expert in food, plants, sports, whatever you want, but there's one expert, and all of the other people in the group have to think of the hardest, trickiest, craziest questions they can ask the expert on their area of expertise. So, Roberto, if you could help me with the breakout rooms, we're going to put you guys in. Sorry?
Absolutely. Just let me know whenever we're ready.
Sure. So, guys, let's go off to our breakout rooms. One of you is going to be the expert, and the rest are going to collaborate together to think of the craziest, most difficult questions for our experts. So if we can open the breakout rooms, just you guys see the box, click join, and let's start asking the expert.
Before we do that, I just want Elo to remind us real quick about our breakout room interaction. Elo?
Okay, remember that, yes, Roberto, thank you. In the breakout rooms, remember, try to turn on your cameras so that the interaction goes smoother. Mute your mic when you're not speaking to avoid some unnecessary background noise, and just follow etiquette guidelines so that you can have a real nice conversation.
All right, everyone, here we go.
Guys, welcome back. We had some really interesting experts. We had some travel experts, and we were trying to outsmart them by traveling to Dubai on a budget. It's an interesting one. We had a theology expert, and the question to outsmart them was, should religious people get involved in politics? There was a cookery expert about trying to convince their kids to eat mondongo. And yeah, we had some agricultural experts asking about how to irrigate areas without water. Those are some really good questions. Well done. So it's great to see you all participating. So it was really interesting. So here, guys, we're going to cover two main topics today. One is the flipped classroom, and another one is a look at collaborative learning. So as Eloisa said earlier, guys, let's just keep our cameras on because it makes it a bit more social. we can actually start creating social connections with each other, even though we're really far away. But also it's nice to sort of talk to a person and not just a black screen. Guys, let's keep our microphones off unless we're talking to each other and collaborating, and most of the good ideas or all of the good ideas come from you guys. So when we go to our breakout rooms, it's a really good opportunity for you to discuss, to bounce ideas off of each other. So listen and comment, and please guys, use the chat. We mentioned earlier you can send your questions. So we're going to get right into it and start off with, what is flipped learning? I hear people all the time saying flipped learning is schoolwork at home and homework at school. So guys, to what extent do you agree or disagree with this statement? We're going to go into breakout rooms again. So you're going to have 5-6 minutes to discuss this question. And we'd really like to hear your opinions on this.
Okay, welcome back, everybody.
All right, so had some interesting comments and ideas floating around there. I was really glad to hear that most of the people in the groups weren't 100% convinced with my statement that flipped learning is basically classwork at home and homework in class. Yeah, you're totally right. We had some really interesting comments about maybe picking the right material for your students to increase student interest and engagement. And we also had some interesting discussions about whether it applies to all ages. And other groups were talking about how maybe we're already implementing a flipped methodology, but maybe we're not 100% aware of it. So it's a really interesting conversation. So as you guys said, flipped learning isn't this simple. If we look at flipped learning, guys, there are certain aspects that are really important. In essence, we move the direct instruction out of the classroom and put it into an individual space. So students do a lot of the learning by themselves, but then the onus on us as professional educators is to transform our space with our students into a dynamic area. It should be dynamic, interactive, okay, where we apply concepts and engage creatively in the matter or the subjects that we're dealing with our students. So if we know that these are the areas, and I'm sure you guys are doing this already, we need to focus on dynamic learning and interactive learning. We need to engage our students and apply concepts. My question for you is, how are you guys doing this? Guys, how are your classrooms dynamic? How do you create an interactive learning environment if we're all online? How do you guide your students to apply new concepts, and how do you engage your students creatively? So guys, we're going to go to breakout rooms again, and we're just going to go through these questions. Remember guys, please turn your cameras on, listen to your partners, and let's bounce ideas off each other. You guys have all the answers. So guys, let's go to our breakout rooms, see the box, click join, and let's talk about this.
Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back, guys. So another really interesting discussion. We had some great contributions by lots of you. Ivan was talking about creating human to human connections in his classrooms and building up student trust. Wendy mentioned the idea of concept checking. She engages her students by using concept checking to make sure they're fully aware of what's happening. Mirna was talking about collaborative documents, which was another interesting idea to increase student engagement and interactivity. And Gabby had some wonderful ideas about using things like bamboozle and games in her sessions, but also challenging her students. She says that challenging her students has worked really well. And there was one comment that really stood out, which came from Veronica. And she said that she does this by moving the role of the teacher out of the center and putting the students at the center. So yeah, that was really interesting. She said that when we move from a teacher-centric model to a student-centric model, sort of engagement interactivity increases. So really good ideas here. I'd like to go through the different steps of FLIP before we carry on. So the F actually stands for flexible environment. Okay, and as we mentioned, but we didn't go into a lot of detail, a lot of the work that is done, or a lot of the learning that's done in the flipped classroom is put on the students. But as professional educators, we provide a flexible environment. This could be in terms of when and where students work. If we're using LMSs and online platforms, students have the flexibility to log on 24 hours a day. We can drip feed the courses to them, but also as maybe flipped teachers, we might rearrange the space in which we actually teach and the learning environments we create. People mentioned that in the discussion we had that sometimes PowerPoints and things like that are a bit rigid, but if we're exploring concepts with our students, we have this flexibility to move everything around. There are a few things that are important, like providing students with different ways to learn, but also to demonstrate mastery. With this flexibility, it's fundamental for us to observe and monitor, and also to establish spaces and timeframes. So we have this flexibility, but within this flexibility, there are certain limits. The L stands for learning culture. This goes back to what you guys mentioned about moving from a teacher-centric model to a student-centric model. Okay, the teacher used to be the primary source of knowledge, whereas in the flipped classroom, students have the knowledge and they learn at their own speed. And lots of the learning is done by them. When they come to class, the teacher now acts more of a guide. And when they do participate in activities, the activities are meaningful. Okay, they're meaningful. We create, we build on knowledge, but they're also scaffolded in a way that is important for the students and great for their learning, but also we're able to give meaningful feedback and differentiate between all of our students. Another topic that came up in our previous discussions was if we front load all of the material to our students, is this overwhelming for them? The I in FLIP is actually intentional content. So we kind of pick and choose the best stuff and what's most relevant for our students for them to study, and then come prepared to our sessions with the intention of maximizing our classroom time to build learning strategies, to develop knowledge. And we prioritize concepts. Okay, we differentiate to make the content accessible and relevant, and we also curate the content, which is what you guys were saying about picking and choosing the best material, the most engaging and interesting material that fit our students' needs. And the P stands for professional educator. If the main source of knowledge no longer comes from the teacher, this kind of leaves the professional educator feeling like, well, where is my role? What exactly do I do? Whereas in the flipped methodology, because it's student-centric, the role of the teacher is almost even more important, because the teachers act as guides. They're constantly assessing and providing meaningful feedback, redirecting the students, and making sure that the students are actually engaged and participating. So some of the things we should be doing is making ourselves available to our students, collaborating and reflecting with other people, which is part of our reflexive teaching standards. And we also conduct formative assessments. We probably move away from summative assessments, where at a certain point students have to show what they're learning, and we adopt this formative route, so every session students can demonstrate progress. These are the main ideas of flipped, but there's another methodology out there called collaborative learning. So guys, my question for you is, what do you understand by the term collaborative learning? Is this the same? Is this different from flipped? And what are your ideas about this? So we're going to go back to our breakout rooms. I'm going to go back to our breakout rooms, and we're going to discuss collaborative learning. So here, guys, see the box? Welcome back, guys. Had some really good comments there. Moises had a really great analogy for it, which was a jigsaw puzzle where every person contributes with their idea to build a final solution. Corina mentioned socialization, which she said was really important in her classes. And Fabiola summed it up nicely, which was let them do their work. Each student provides their own insight. Veronica was talking about her experience with collaborative learning, where she was asked to work with literature, and each student provided their own sort of interpretation, and they sort of discussed that. And David had some really nice comments about creating a safe zone with activities that aren't too challenging, but challenging enough. And the idea of making the participants think, and where they bounce ideas off of each other, the learning takes place. So guys, really interesting conversations, and please feel free to continue these conversations on the community of practice that is available. So it's always there, and you can extend these discussions. So collaborative learning is basically an approach by which groups work together to enhance the learning. Okay, groups of 2 or more learners work together to solve a problem. There was a group who started talking about project-based learning, which is another great concept, and they use this to problem-solving tasks. But in the collaborative learning, we get the groups and the students to contribute their own ideas to solve maybe a common problem, and through this way learn the new concepts. So as we're working together to problem solve, we prioritize communication above anything else, where we give the individuals lots of time to participate and learn from each other. There were comments in the groups about time management, which is also a very valid point. But the emphasis here is on the students working together to sort of to teach each other, and we work as guides. It sounds very similar to flipped, where it's student-centered and there's a focus maybe on communication, but there are some big differences. So when it comes to studying the source material, collaborative learning has a huge focus on collaboration and communication, the discussion of ideas, and through this discussion, the construction of knowledge. It tends to set aside time for students to actually read and contemplate materials. We might dedicate some of our classroom time to this in order to make sure everyone has something to talk about, and there move on to the learning. It has a huge focus as well, and it encourages students to assist in each other's comprehension. Okay, we know that when we get our peers involved, that it really makes a huge difference, and sometimes the concepts are easier to comprehend. And in the collaborative learning environment, it makes students feel better prepared, but also more confident to express their ideas. In Flip, there's more of an emphasis on this sort of self-paced, self-motivation, where students have to study on their own time and come prepared to the sessions. We saw earlier that the main source of the information is moved from the teacher and put onto the students, where they may be given activities beforehand, which they might need to study. And in e-learning, these are things like LMS platforms. With Flips, there's an encouragement for students to create deeper and more personal relationships with the material that they're covering. And because they're working asynchronously lots of the time, for a lot of the time, this frees up class time to actually sort of engage with them and explore concepts and construct knowledge. When it comes to things like student discussions, collaborative learning, it's all about encouraging students to talk and talk a lot. We acknowledge the role of unsupervised discussion, and we understand that unsupervised discussion can actually generate understanding, with each other person contributing their ideas and their point of views, and it makes talking the agent of learning. In the flipped methodology, there's an emphasis on class time discussion and collaboration, and it relies heavily on students having studied independently and formed their own ideas. And in flipped learning, the actual flipped classroom becomes a place for testing up thoughts and ideas and theories. When it comes to student instruction, in a collaborative learning environment, we sort of instruct students within this collaboration. And the collaboration itself can form many different shapes and sizes. The idea is students do work together to reach the learning objectives, and there's a huge priority on cooperation and discussion. Educators might present students with case studies or dilemmas and ask them to come up with a response. And there's also a position taken by the educator to ask students to respond and criticize ideas. In the flipped classroom, educators, I don't know, might create videos or might create material that's front loaded, so students have to work and prepare before they come to their classes. And one of the great things about this, when students come prepared, that it gives us a sense of freedom in our classroom. We get away from sort of repetitive teaching techniques and explaining, because the explaining is done asynchronously. So we have more of an opportunity to engage with our students. And there's more of a devotion to forming relationships with students. We can work closer with students who might need extra help, and this also allows for higher order thinking. When it comes to demonstrating understanding, in a collaborative learning environment, students are constantly presenting and discussing ideas and demonstrating continuous learning. Educators might choose more clear and appropriate times for assessment, but if we're going to be assessing these students in a collaborative learning environment, it's fundamental to make our students aware when, how, and when they're going to be assessed. In the flipped classroom, it may be hard to actually assess students because the majority of the work is done by the student in the student's own time in this flexible environment. So there may be some summative assessments if we're using platforms like LMSs, but more formative assessment in our classes. Unfortunately, this can make it easier for students who are struggling to actually hide, because as they're working asynchronously, it's hard for us to see what they're actually doing. And when they come to class, more maybe vocal students actually can take over. And there's more weight given to the activities done in class as the instructions being moved. So here, guys, I'd like to show you some of the ideas and some of the ways that we've been doing this recently. We believe there's not one solution to all of these problems, and sort of maybe a collaborative experience with some of the elements of flipped learning may be beneficial for students. We know that all of these methodologies have pros and cons, so it's good to maybe think about our practice and sort of cherry pick what's best. One of the projects we've been working on recently is with young adults. So in the sense of flipped learning, where we provide the students with material to study beforehand, we picked some aspects for students to learn so they could come prepared, but we didn't make our classes fundamental or solely dependent on this. So we have a class called the Quiet Zone. And the idea of the Quiet Zone is basically it's a class about talking. So we start off with clear learning objectives, which is using idioms related to talking. And we have this assessment at the end, which is recommending a friend to do a digital detox. Our focus on here is all about idioms. So we may have front loaded or given these students the tasks to prepare before the class, as in flipped, but we know that maybe not all students are the same and not all students are dedicated. So we start off with a collaborative task for students to sort of put the new idioms into practice. Then we check their comprehension, okay, by matching. And students do all these tasks collaboratively, okay? But then we move this into more of an open discussion where we can check students' comprehension. So we've given the students the opportunity to learn on their own. We've reinforced collaboratively, and now we open up a discussion just to check their comprehension. So this becomes very engaging, and it gives the students a lot of time to actually participate. We move on to more of a discussion. This is sort of a warmer to introduce the main idea of the session. And then we sort of start provoking ideas with interesting topics. We know that maybe if we tell the students we're going to talk about clothes and going shopping, this may not be engaging for them. So we look for almost, I don't know, just interesting topics that might be slightly controversial. So the main idea of this session is a town in the States that has no cell phones and Wi-Fi's because of a huge satellite. So we get our students thinking about this, looking at the pros and cons and the benefits and how we can solve this problem. And then we assess their learning, which could be both asynchronous and their collaboration in class with a simple role play. So we saw that there's a town in the States that has no sort of Wi-Fi and has no phones. So what about if your friend was addicted to that? How could you convince them to go on a digital detox? Okay, so here it's something sort of slightly unusual but engaging for our students. When it comes to younger learners, we created something else, which is here. Okay, so with younger learners, where did I put it? We created interactive storybooks for our students to actually practice either in class or with their parents. For example, here. So this is a trimmed down version of it, of one of them, which is Kiki Goes to the Dentist. This is an interactive storybook that young learners can actually do maybe asynchronously, but we also provide lesson plans and parents guides if the teachers want to do this, the parents want to do this asynchronously. So it starts off with Kiki. It's really simple. I should cut this down, and everything in this is interactive for them. So they can click on the text
The alarm
and
rings.
it speaks. They can mess around, turn the lights on and off, and click on the alarm. So we're engaging younger students like this, but this can be used in class. So the story progresses with Kiki's mom speaking.
Good morning, sleepyhead. Let's wake up. Today is
and Kiki doesn't want to get up because she's tired. But all of the people you can click on and they speak. And then there's a focus on sort of emotions. The story progresses, and Kiki ends up actually in the dentist's office, and again it's still very interactive. You can click on the plugs and they give you electric shocks, or you can click on the dentist and the dentist speaks. But all of this can be broken up into sections for students to do either asynchronously or in class. We created some of these tasks for students to do, which could be listen and click on the right option, or watch the dentist and give Kiki her toothbrush. So even with young learners, we're trying to sort of mix and match this up as well, because we included vocabulary, but interactive vocabulary. So here they can click on exactly what they want to learn. And we even created games. So now the tooth fairy is coming, and you have to find the tooth, which is under here, and give it to the tooth fairy and say, yeah, I found the tooth. Okay. But with this material that is sort of flexible and open, we can build lessons. Okay. So we have the parents guide, but we also have lesson plans, songs, and activities. So even in with young learners, we can get them collaborating and learning together. So I'd just like to leave you with the thought before we move on to the question and answer section with maybe one methodology is not the best way to do it. Maybe there are tools and things we can do out there to create a more enriching and engaging environment for our students, whether young and old. So I'd just like to say thank you for your time, thank you for your collaboration, and I'd like to open up the microphones or the chat for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Robert. There's already a question in the chat. They're asking about the app that you used I'm assuming that's Kiki's Adventures, the interactive story-based app that I mentioned in your bio.
Mhm. Yeah, those interactive stories, they're part of our courses for primary school kids, and we're working on the secondary school kids as well. It's called Kiki's Adventures, and actually, I have an ebook for all of you, which is this Kiki Goes to the Dentist one. So you guys can actually download it. I've sent it off, so it's going to be available for you. And this has the whole story in PDF, but also it has the songs with the lyrics and the activities you can do.
And there's another question here. Barry Velis asks, it is impossible to avoid conflict when working together. As a teacher, how do you tackle situations like this when students perform more complex activities such as projects?
Okay, projects. Oh, that's really interesting. I think projects can contribute a lot to a course. When I approach sort of projects, I would think about the final objective, and I would give students plenty of time to work on the project. So if I have a project, I'm not going to give my students, I probably wouldn't even include a project in one of my sessions. I would make a lot of the asynchronous work part of the project development. So everything they're doing asynchronously relates to our learning objectives and what we're going to do in class, but we can build on it to create a final project. So in this case, there's a lot of sort of follow-up that we need to do and monitoring. But this is one of the great things about sort of working online, that we can actually get in touch with our students quite often. When we do things like this, it's really clear to have like really clear guidelines and to make our expectations really well understood. So there's sort of no misunderstanding. But just be clear and upfront with your students, create expectations and make sure they're clear and stick to them. So it can be as simple as, guys, I'll check my emails and I'll answer you within a day, but come on, if it's Friday night, I'm gonna get back to you on Monday.
Okay, there's another question here. Can you give some ideas to engage teenagers, 15 through 19-year-olds? It's hard to have them work collaboratively or participate in class, especially now that we're working from home.
Yeah, teenagers, it's an interesting topic because there's this whole transition that they're going through, and something that we've seen that's worked quite well is sort of just finding stuff that's interesting for them and moving away from it's a class. This probably just me, but the idea of when we tell teenagers they have to go to class, there's an automatic rejection. So I'm working with some teenagers in Spain, and there was one of the projects we actually did was a world without music. So we know sort of teenagers are out there exploring music, and it's something that's relevant for them. But in Australia, I think it's the Sydney Symphonic Orchestra are going through some really hard times. So we're like, guys, you're like 15, 16. Do you know about technology? We're old, we don't know anything. But you guys can actually help us solve this problem, because imagine what a world without music would be like. That's one project. Another project we did was in Morocco, Caribbean, and the States, about animals. So it seems like a rather banal topic. It's animals, everyone knows about animals. But we got students actually thinking about sort of what animals mean and what animals, the role they have in our lives. And the final project was actually for them to create toys for donkeys. So we used collaborative platforms online for them to come up with the actual toy. One of them was like a music playing, light flashing things for donkeys to do, and the students loved it.
Okay, we have another question here. What strategies do you recommend for students who fear collaborative learning because of their fear of making mistakes and exploring language?
It's an excellent question, and I think it was David who said this earlier, and I know other people here spoke mentioned it. This was creating an environment, a safe learning environment. For example, flipped learning has loads and loads of benefits, but one of the things that I've noticed is the first few weeks of a course, they may feel overloaded and overwhelmed with the coursework. So I would probably suggest that we dedicate a certain amount of time to creating this safe environment, but also include socialization. We have loads of tools available out there that can increase our connectivity and the relationships we have with our students. But it's important to have a big picture way of thinking about these things. If maybe in our first couple of weeks of class, we have to cover a certain amount of material, so we're sort of sidelining this interactivity and this actual human connection, which someone else mentioned. Yeah, we may be reaching our learning objectives, but it should go further than that, because learning doesn't stop once our class stops. Learning is it evolves, and there's also something we should think about once the course ends, that we can keep challenging our students. And it's fundamental, I would say, to actually create these bonds, because once we gain their trust and students feel comfortable in participating, their learning actually increases.
Okay, thank you very much. We still have a few more minutes before we end, so maybe someone would like to come off mute and ask their question. Roberto will help us with the magic.
Yeah, just raise your hand and I'll help you.
And just to remind you, the presentation will be uploaded to the COP. Those of you who have been asking about the materials and the presentation, it's all going to be there. All you do is you only have to join.
We have David
Roberto,
who
I think
has a question. David, go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, Robert. Thanks. My question was actually about the software you used for your presentation. I like that simple, clean interface. Can you tell me what that was?
Of course,
Right.
it's PowerPoint.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna have to look at that. I wanted to say thank you, because my big takeaway for me on this one wasn't something you told us, it's something you showed us. And it was the way when we came out of the breakout rooms that you had mentioned things that people had said. That's something I've been struggling with in the groups I'm doing, because they're a bit more advanced, and it's hard to give them time to regroup after a breakout room, and being able to point out important, pertinent things, and also to give them that little boost of like, hey, this is working, sort of thing. That was a huge takeaway for me. So thank you for that.
Thank you, David. It's one of the things I mentioned right at the beginning, guys. You guys have all the best ideas. This is why collaboration, especially between peers, is so good, because maybe one person's doing something that another person hadn't thought about, or one person's facing a problem that another person's faced and found a good solution to. So tools like the community of practice that you guys have available for you, it is such a great way to extend these conversations, yeah, and increase our learning. So it's a great comment. Thank you.
Any other question? We still have a few more minutes. So we just posted the links for the survey and for the for joining the COP. So Thank you very, very much. And on behalf of the organizing committee of the National Conference for Teachers of English, Costa Rica, I want to thank Robert Boyle for his presentation today and his willingness to share his time and contribute to the success of our online event. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you very, very much. It's been a great session.